Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream of Red Light Expose. Today, we have a really interesting topic that I've been wanting to get into for a long time. So anyone new to the show, on here, we discuss commercial sexual exploitation. But we define that a little more broadly than just prostitution or pornography or the more obvious types of exploitation. We're interested in discussing where these dynamics show up elsewhere in society. And they do show up quite overtly, repeatedly, obviously, in entertainment. And specifically today, we'll be going into film and television. And for those who don't know me, my name is Elly. I'm coming to you from Germany. I'm a longtime activist against sex trafficking and against sexual violence. And with me is my co-host, Sybil, joining us from the US.
Hi, everybody. I'm really excited for today's guest. We talk a lot about, I hear a lot of talk about messages in the media, messages in, over here in the US, it's Hollywood. And we also, on the other side, hear a lot of quote unquote gossip about, scandals in the entertainment industry. But I don't see a lot of connecting those dots and asking questions about like the behavior of the people who are creating this media and the messages. Those are kind of usually talked about separately. So I'm really excited to hear Diana give us some, insight into how abusive elements in the entertainment industry itself influences the culture.
Yes, because today we actually have an industry insider with us. Diana is a screenwriter and a director who has worked in the film and television industry for several years and will give us some of the inside scoop. I'm really excited to talk to you, Diana. Do you want to introduce yourself to the audience? Tell us how you got into film and also into thinking very critically about that industry.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. I've been in the industry a little more than a decade, little under a decade, I think actually. I'm approaching a decade soon, I think. And I've worked across multiple different film industries around the world. Um, where like at the point when I started in the industry, my interest was in television specifically, and this was post the economic crisis in 2008, when it was kind of like a golden age of television, especially in the States. And it was, for the most part, kind of a pretty decent paying job, and I was very interested in learning how to be a writer and working on some of these teams because I just thought they made incredibly critically relevant sort of shows and programming. I felt like there was a lot of stuff that was up for discussion that wasn't part of the mainstream media before. There was definitely a lot more room for diversity than there wasn't before. And so I entered the industry at a time when I would say the general feeling about the industry was way more optimistic than it is now. And then, as you know, the thing is, you come in with like rose tinted glasses and you have an understanding of the industry that's very based on meritocratic kind of ideals of, oh, if you're just the best at what you do, you're good at your craft, and you're sincere and you keep showing up and you keep going to all the networking events, eventually sooner or later it will be your turn, and like your number and your favor will switch and everything will be different, and you'll get a chance to say what you really care about, and people will watch your stuff and you're going to change society. And I think that every single person who enters the film business has it. Like, maybe of course there's plenty of them who are there just for the fame, but I think especially if you're coming in as like a behind the scenes kind of person as opposed to an actor, your perception is more like, I have a chance to like influence society and I have a chance to influence public perception, and there's like a lot of power in that and a lot of hope in that as well. But then when you actually work in the industry, um, it's because it's so, in some countries it's not regulated at all, in some countries it's not even really properly treated like an industry. So exploitation is very rampant across the spectrum. It doesn't matter if you're an editor or you're a director, a writer, maybe if you're a producer you're okay, but for the most part, if you're any of the others, actor, anybody else, stage hands, body doubles, you are ripe for exploitation. And overwhelmingly, especially post COVID, and post strikes in the US, there has been like a general malaise that I would say that's taken over this industry, where people are more open and more like they're more vocal about the ways in which they're not protected and the ways in which they've been exploited. Has become more of a discussion. I definitely think around the time that Me Too happened, there was a lot of discussion about specifically sexual exploitation in the industry. But as time went on, there was more light shed on all of the multitudes of ways in which you can be exploited in this industry, because it's not always sexual. It's like a lot of psychological torture as well. A lot of like, it's a strange business, because you enter the business being very vulnerable. You're if especially if you're a writer or director, you're trading some incredibly emotional, vulnerable stuff for money. You know what I mean? And it doesn't feel like any other corporate job where you go in and you do a skill, you do a service, and then you get paid for your ability to do that service competently. Of course, you're expected to be good at your job, but there's an element of vulnerability because people are using real stories, people are using real experiences and feelings. And so the line between what is appropriate and what is not appropriate is very blurred. And so, yeah, I think that's what I can shed some light on, and just like how these deals are formed, especially the business side. What's the priority? What's the bottom line for the people who are the quote unquote suits versus what it's like to be somebody who's behind the scenes, or even someone who's an actor?
Yeah, I think there's so many aspects of filming that, well, I'm not always sure how much consumers are aware of sort of the nature of filming television or TV that can make, like you said, any crew member really vulnerable. So one, right, it's gig work. That means you might have a lot of work, very intense work, very demanding work, very long hours for certain stretches of time, and then have nothing in between. Or you're going to be competing with a lot of people. In our pre-chat, you mentioned it's a very tough hierarchy on set. Sort of the producers and the directors are king, usually queen sometimes, I guess, but usually king. And then if it's successfully completed, it's going to be rolled out possibly to an audience of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, who will be evaluating for actors, certainly your presence on screen. There's so many different aspects there that are probably inherently challenging or vulnerable. And well, when it comes to power abuse, there's a long, sordid, awful history there. Do you want to tell us a bit about like early Hollywood and how both the inherent parts of filming and also the specific structures back then enabled power abuse?
So I'm just gonna do like an abridged version of what happened. So any of the real film history buffs, please don't get too upset that I cut the story short. I'm just trying to get everyone up to speed. So what happened? Let's start with Los Angeles, the city, right? And Los Angeles used to be just a bunch of land, like free land that nobody really lived in except maybe, obviously Native American people. And the early companies, this is like MGM, and there's a few others, Paramount maybe, and Columbia, I think, Universal, those people, like the early people who started those companies, they just bought up a bunch of land in Los Angeles. And that's how most of the studios started. Like the land was really cheap. And these men who started their businesses doing things on the side, like they might have owned an electrical company, or they might have worked on a railroad or something. They had like a lot of disposable income to just go up and buy land out in Los Angeles. And this was the time when like the movie camera was invented. And so they were like, we have a chance of influencing culture through propaganda. And this is what they used. This was the term back then. It was always, in most countries, the film industry is the propaganda industry of the country. And if you look at early history of film in any country, and you look at the way they refer to just movie making as an art form or as a craft, it was very much with the intention of calling it propaganda. It was we'll make positive propaganda about X issue that we want to sell to the audience. And so a lot of these men came to Hollywood with some amount of money, built up these studios from scratch, and now they had to work out an industry. And back in the day, especially in the golden age of Hollywood was the 1940s. And this was, post 20s depression. Up until that point, it was vaudeville, which is like this clown, like traveling circus kind of thing. Drew Barrymore, if you know Drew Barrymore, her family is like an illustrious Hollywood family that came from that business. And they were essentially like a traveling troupe of theater actors and performers, and that was the early stage beginnings of the industry. That wasn't film, but many of those actors went on to work in silent films. So initially they were shooting stuff and it was black and white and there was no sound, and they would put in money into this, it would be like short little things that they would shoot, and they put it into these things called Nickelodeons. So you'd have like little coins that you would put into a machine and you'd be able to watch movies on this like little device. And then they realized that if we're going to move to silent film, we need to now start adding screenwriters and having actual elaborate stories. So they started hiring people that were like extremely talented writers from around the country to come and move to LA. And those people were paid a bomb, by the way. Being a screenwriter back then was a very profitable business. Like, you would be really wealthy in a very short amount of time. And so their job was to create stories for the silent storylines. And so now you had to have actors. But the thing is, because it was such a new industry, nobody really wanted to be an actor, just because it was like odd hours, and for a woman it was considered incredibly indecent work akin to prostitution. And so a lot of the early actors in Hollywood were either people who came from really, really impoverished backgrounds, from the middle of nowhere where they had no reputations, because no one with a reputation would do that job. And this was the case in Hollywood, and this is the case in a lot of other countries as well, is that this was not considered legitimate, respectful work for a woman to do. And so a lot of the people that came in, they had to now find a way to retain talent. And it was very much based on, who is the hottest bombshell of Kentucky? Can we bring her over? Like, how can we incentivize her to come and work in our industry? And so they started a contract system. And this contract system was, we're going to bring out this girl from the middle of nowhere. We're going to put her in a house up in LA that we pay for, but we own her. We own her likeness. We own what kind of movies she can do. We own her image. We own her identity, her name. Her name would often be changed. Her backstory would be changed. Everything to sell an image to the public that was often not true. The most famous example of this is probably Marilyn Monroe. As you all know, her name was Norma Ray. That was not her original name was not Marilyn. And she was actually one of the few that came from Los Angeles. So she was from a foster home in Los Angeles. I think she had a mentally unwell mother. She had a sister that she didn't get to reunite with until she was much older. But she was like the prime ripe candidate for this kind of industry because, again, she had no support system. She had no one looking out for her. And so she was brought into the studio system. She'd probably be given a contract, like maybe, 4 to 5 films. And for the duration of the 4 to 5 films, you are loaned out to the company. So you have a contract with the company, and they also control your public relations, i.e. who you can have romantic relationships with. So they discouraged heavily people from dating within the company. So you couldn't date an actor. I mean, you could, but it'd have to be secret. You know what I mean? You couldn't publicly date another actor within the same company as you. So if you were a contracted MGM actor, you couldn't have a boyfriend that was also an MGM. And there was a lot of, behind the scenes, like if a woman got pregnant, they'd do abortions and plastic surgery. And so these companies owned you. So think of the studio and the studio head as like the pimp. And that's what they were. They were pimps back then. They would loan out the actresses to sleep with people that they wanted to have business deals with. And they would pay off their mothers and their fathers to, keep them in the company much longer, and they were basically completely controlled. So this was the beginning of the industry, especially for actors.
Yeah, that is not surprising to me at all. And it kind of goes back to something that I'm often saying, which is, how many industries, we talk about the sex abuse industry as if it's one thing, but to my mind, anything that the purpose of it is making young, vulnerable women accessible to older, powerful men sexually, that is pimping. So there's so many industries globally really function. This is the engine to kind of the entire economic system.
Mm-hmm. And they would get them young, right? They would get them as children. And if you look at it for also they would get a lot of people who were escorts or people who were prostitutes who were being sexually exploited in other companies, because many of these men would go maybe to brothels around their local area, and then they would get the local attraction, and she she doesn't have any support system or family, clearly, like she's out there on her own, and then they would hire this person and be like, we're going to remake your whole image. And they could do that back then because there was no social media. So you could literally pluck a person out from obscurity and rebuild an entire image for her, and nobody would know for a fact whether, you know, where she came from and what her history was. But because she's uniquely vulnerable and that she has no other support system or no one looking out for her, you can keep her under your thumb for like 10 movies, you know.
Wow.
And until she does the 10 movies with you, she can't break that contract.
And that's just like, you know, how traffickers, they get you somewhere, they get you in debt, and then you have to pay off that debt. You know, you have an obligation that you're stuck there. Yeah. It's so interesting to me always how these mechanisms work in the same way, like it's the same strategies in so many different contexts.
And they were paid salaries, right? So they would provide housing for you, and if you came in super young, they would train you. They would put you through music classes and dance class. They did this with Judy Garland, where she was in the, I think it was called the Red Brick House. This was MGM's personal facility for the actors, and so the younger actors were put there together, and they were trained in, you know, all sorts of arts. So, you know, dancing and tap dancing, singing, etc. And so they kind of owed a debt to the company, because it's like, we provided free housing and training for you, and so we're going to lock you into this contract for 10 years or for however long. It would usually be movie specific, so it'd be like, we'll lock you in for a picture for about 5 pictures. You work for us, and sometimes if the actor became super popular, like in the case of Judy Garland or Elizabeth Taylor, sometimes other companies would fight for the actor. So like, they would have bidding wars over the actor, being like, we're going to purchase the contract out from you. And of course, if that person was like the major talent for that studio, they wouldn't necessarily want to lose their hold over that particular actor. So they could loan out those actors to other studios for a fee. So the company is always profiting whether you choose to work for them or not. And you might make a cut, but like, your salary for the most part stays the same. And very few of them actually had the ability to control the financial incentive. So even if, say, you're an actor, you are loaned out to MGM to work for 5 films, but your actual main contract is with, you know, Columbia Pictures, you're stuck with them forever. Like, that's your main base. So you can go out, but you're not making any extra money from working at MGM. Columbia is, because they're loaning out their talent. So there's no profit sharing, you know what I mean? And I'm guessing this is the same even when it comes to actual prostitution. It's not like there's a real benefit to the person who actually has to deliver the services, quote unquote, like, you know, if they move from one pimp to another. It's the pimps that profit. You know?
Yes. No, to this day, there are still, like, even in a system with legal prostitution, pimps will literally pay each other to you know, swap human beings. And I'm just, yeah, what you describe is it's really depressing, and it's a really pertinent summary. And well, while this is happening, while a lot of these even underage girls are facing exploitation behind the scene, there's also the question of the exploitation in front of the camera, because I know there might not be a universal answer to this, but at the same time as this is happening, and they are looking for young, and they are looking for attractive and titillating, there's also the censorship culture that doesn't, it's not like at the time you can show anything you want. There are various rules on what you can and can't show, but I can imagine screenwriters and directors, etc., are pushing the envelope as far as they can to especially expose female bodies, put women in situations in front of the camera. Can you go into sort of that trajectory, the development around censorship laws, which I'm sure a lot of people would say, oh, like whenever this is talked about, it's talked about like women kind of got liberated in front of the camera by these being abolished. And just like we became less hypocritical because now they're exploited in front of the camera and behind, you know? But it's not like there was no golden age in terms of human rights for the actors back then, and nor are they liberated now.
Also, certain things in Hollywood happen more as a reaction to things than a proactive, intentional setting of tone. And if you look at prohibition, for example, specifically, so there was this code, this morality code that appeared in Hollywood that was kind of an informal code called the Hays Code, and it prevented you from showing actors of different races commingling, because back then it was, segregation was still the norm in America. And so it was anti-miscegenation laws that, you couldn't have, of course, there were people of color working in the industry who were like biracial, and they looked white, so nobody questioned them. But legally, actually, they weren't supposed to be in camera, romancing a white actor, for example. And so the Hays Code actually came more as a reaction, because there was a period where, in the 30s specifically, that the media was actually weirdly progressive in the US in terms of like talking about divorce as an issue and talking more about the everyday lives of women. More specifically, because at that point they hadn't had really a censorship sort of board yet. They hadn't had like an official kind of doctrine that came out of the government that said, hey, these are things you definitely cannot talk about. And so it was oddly progressive for a really short period of time. And then certain law, like around the time of the world, like right before the World War II specifically, they suddenly had all these morality clauses. And so you couldn't talk about certain issues. You couldn't, like, there, I remember like in the 30s, there was like so many movies about divorced, fabulously wealthy women being like, I've mysteriously killed my husband. And, like all the noir films were just like, I'm going to secretly kill my boyfriend and nobody's going to know that I did it, And they had a lot of movies like that because like noir was really big. And then what ended up happening is the government and all these other people got wind, and they were like, there's just no way. We need to, contribute to like this family image of American society. And we don't want women to seem too free. Like there has to be a distinction between the character that becomes like the vamp versus the character that's the good American woman who's like, at home, barefoot and pregnant, looking after her kids. Like, and so it was very much a reaction. It wasn't like when there was no censorship, they kind of just made up whatever story they wanted to, which in general is like, how can we push the envelope of that time? Right. And then what ended up happening is because those films became really popular, suddenly you had a whole bunch of people from, just the parts of America where they were like, there's no way we want women to behave like this, suddenly come out and say, you need to actually create a distinction between good woman and bad woman is punished. And you have to make sure she's punished badly enough that no woman in America is going to think twice about, she's going to think twice before she does something like that. And it even came down to how women were styled, right? So they couldn't show breast, they couldn't show cleavage, and they couldn't show legs, if I remember correctly. Like they couldn't have extremely short skirts, and they couldn't have extremely low cut tops. And so around that period, which was like the 30s and the 40s, we look at a lot of films then, they had a lot of really cool backless dresses that came out, specifically because that was the only part of the body that they could show. And that was to show a woman off as like if they had a sensual sort of character who was like kind of the come hither woman, and like very sexually in control, like they would have her in that kind of dress, specifically because that was the only thing that they were allowed to do. So like the morality clauses of Hollywood were very much a reaction, and they weren't like this industry just came out brand new and we're going to put a bunch of guidelines, because that's usually not what happens. If you look at AI, it's the same, right? It's like we've just let this thing explode randomly, and as an afterthought, we're going to now come up with regulations. And that's pretty much like how it's been for almost every industry, including Hollywood, where it was like, oh, we're just going to make up these stories of things that are taboo in our society, and then you're going to have like some really powerful contingent of people who are like extremely right wing or fundamentally religious in some way, and they're going to come in and be like, absolutely not, how dare you suggest women have autonomy, back to the kitchen, woman, and that's how you get those kinds of stories.
Mm-hmm. And I come from that fundamentalist religious environment, and something you said at the beginning about the very conscious creation of propaganda through film. And I really always see things through this lens of symbol, and what you were just saying about creating the woman who gets punished and giving her a style and giving her essentially like an icon. And I think that I really see the fight between the religious right and the quote unquote secular left. I find the secular left to have a lot of religious undertones, and I think this is one of them, like the kind of they're kind of fighting over the same turf, if that makes sense. The religious right wants the symbology and the messages of that religion, whether it's, here in the US, it's the Christian nationalism, and in other places, it's other fundamentalist religions. But, and then the left wants to kind of tear that monopoly that the religions have over it. Am I making sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And also on the subject of religious sentiments and censorship, well, we had a really long pre-chat for this live stream. I learned a lot about Bollywood. Can we do a small excursion on censorship in Bollywood? Because a lot of what you told me was really fascinating and gives sort of a second perspective beyond just the US.
So Bollywood specific. So I think when you look at the US and India's film industries, you have to look at it in relation to the historical time period in which they became really big, right? And Bollywood has had like 100+ year, like more than 100 years of industry. And the original industry started really as a act of rebellion against the British. And so the original censorship board of India was not the Indian government itself, but the British. And so their gripe was not so much, I mean, they always had a problem with Indian women specifically because our natural clothes were, according to them, very sexual and primitive, right? Because we didn't wear blouses, and our original clothes were, again, built for the heat and the humidity of our countries, and compared to like Victorian norms of fashion, where we definitely seem way more comfortable in our own skin. We're not going to be wearing a parasol and a petticoat out in anywhere in India for whatever reason. But obviously, because these men were there and they wanted to discourage, again, miscegenation between the races, there was a twofold problem in that they kind of knew that any of the counterculture film movements that were going to come out of the country were going to be anti-British. And so their rules were specifically like, you can't do anything that's going to target the British government. That's going to say that, our presence in this country is anything but a good for this country. And so the way they found around it was music, because the music used a kind of like especially if you look at South India, and you look at Tamil Nadu specifically, which is one of the states in India, their music used a highbrow kind of Tamil that was not normally used with members of, just the average British civil forces who were there. They would learn like a very localized version of that language. They wouldn't learn the higher brow version of that language. And so they would kind of mislead the British by making music that was like talking about yearning for a woman, but the woman was actually the nation, because India is considered a mother. So, it's like, I yearn to be reunited with my mother. My mother should be free. She is under the she's in the arms of a white devil or whatever. I mean, they wouldn't say that, specifically, but they would be very poetic about it. And so it was harder to censor and that's how music has become such a big thing in the industry there, is because it was originally seen as an act of resistance to the British. And so that's really how it got incorporated into the industry over there. And that's why people feel so passionately about it in general. They might not, lots of Indians probably don't know this history about the industry, but I've done a lot of reading about it specifically as to why music became such a huge deal within that industry. And so because people would come in for the songs specifically, they had the same problem that Hollywood did, which is that they couldn't have women, regular women, be actors, because, again, it's seen as a very disreputable job. And so what they did was they cast women that came from the borders of the country, that were part of like the brothels that were existing to serve the British soldiers. So Rangoon, there was a lot of Burmese and foreign biracial actors who in general are kind of largely ignored within India at that time, because they were neither Indian nor were they fully British. So they had no place in British society, but they had no real place in Indian society too. So they were castaways, really. And so they were mixed race people, or they were people who came out of Burma. And so they were the leads of the songs. And the songs would be so popular that it would make those actresses like overnight sensations. And so everyone knew them. So a lot, like Bollywood was a lot more upfront about the fact that the women it casted in the early days of the industry were specifically women who were either straight up child stars, they had worked in the industry since from childhood, or they were, and all of them were poor. All of them came from incredibly poor families. Like they were the breadwinners of their family, and that's why they had to enter the business. Or they were collected secretly. I mean, of course, that wasn't the story that was fed to the public, that they were taken from brothels specifically, but they were most definitely women who were trafficked into British cantonments and brothels that were brought in because they had no reputation to quote unquote lose, you know? So very similar origins and similar levels. I mean, maybe not the same level of control in terms of a studio system. It's wild because I think Bollywood does more of that studio system now, where you can have a contract with them for 5 films. But obviously, they don't have that much control over your personal life. Like, you can date whoever, you can marry whoever. They don't have any say on that. But the early days, it was specifically like, nobody wants to do this job. How are we going to get people to do this job? We have to go after kids. We have to go after poor kids. And we have to go after women who have no reputation to lose, but have everything to gain from the money they could make or the fame they could make.
And there was an additional thing that I had no idea about that you mentioned in our pre-chat, which was in regards to what could be shown in front of the camera. You're going to have to remind me of the decades there. But you mentioned that sex scenes were taboo, or consensual intimacy, even, more light
Yes.
level was taboo. But showing the beginnings of a rape or attempt at rape wasn't.
So this was specifically the 80s and the 90s. So early Bollywood, it was always very chaste. You couldn't really like, a lot of the stories tend to be single hero's journey stories about one guy who's fighting for the honor of like a family member. And so rape based storylines were a really big part of the engine of the country, in terms of like, you have to defend someone's honor. And so at least in the early days, I think they were very, very chaste. Like, even people kissing, it was like 2 flowers would be put in front of the screen so that it's like, oh, they're kissing. Or they'd be running around behind trees singing songs and stuff like, but you could never actually show them making out. And you definitely couldn't show them do any, like, I don't even think I ever saw them hold hands. Let me put it that way. Like, heterosexual intimacy was just zero. And then 80s, 90s came around, and again, they did not show consensual sex. They definitely didn't really show 2 people kissing either. But rape scenes were done in great detail. And I don't know whether the intention was shock value to kind of justify the character's future violence against his enemies, to be like, oh, my sister was raped, and so I'm going to go and fight the bad guy in her honor. But I think to a country it's wild, because we're the land of the Kama Sutra, but we're also incredibly sexually repressed. So it's like, which, you can be both, right? And so you have this country that doesn't have really honest discussions about sexual intimacy, and somehow is the #1 most populated country in the world. And we're obviously not getting there through osmosis or cross-pollination. So, so how do we have discussions that are honest? But every single depiction of intimacy in the mainstream media in the 90s was very violent. And it was like, the male character was stalking the female character. She would say no a bunch of times, and you would just ignore her saying no. So there was like a lot of rejection of consent, a lot of rejection of mutually enthusiastic intimacy. And I think it didn't really start changing until the 2010s, where now they're suddenly showing like people kissing, and maybe they'll show like a sex scene, but it's still very chaste. It's still like, in comparison, and I say chaste in comparison to like how it is in Hollywood, where in Hollywood I feel like it's so explicit, but, and I don't know that I don't know whether this for us is a win or not. I do think that when you're going to depict sexual relations on screen, choosing only to show sex as something that's a negative thing that's done to you as an act of domination can have as much of a disastrous effect as incredibly explicit, almost pornographic sex scenes. You know what I mean? Like, there has to be a fine line between the two, where you can show intimacy, but it's still appropriate for viewing and not pornified. I don't know, I remember I had this discussion with you where I was like, it could be as simple as man and woman look at each other and then a door is shut. We know what's happening after that. We don't really need to have a scene where both of them have their asses out and they're going at it. You know what I mean? But I think that to a certain degree Bollywood is doing that, but then now we have to deal with incredibly misogynistic storytelling, so you can't win.
Yeah, it's really rough. I think I've mentioned elsewhere on the show that I sometimes I get so sick of what comes out of the US in terms of TV shows, where you'll just get a cut to a new scene and it's like full nudity, it's full simulated sex. It looks very real. It looks straight out of porn. And then I'm like, I can't take this. I'm just gonna watch some Korean soaps. And then Korean soaps have their own issues. Maybe Korean soaps can get their whole designated live stream someday. That's a lot of complicated thoughts there. I feel like there's been some evolution in the Korean entertainment industry in regards to depiction of women, but it's still not good. But yeah, well, certainly in many countries we are in the era of very, very, very gratuitous sex scenes, and whenever I see them, not only do I feel like a voyeur. This is they often make me uncomfortable, and it takes me out of the storyline because I'm thinking, oh, this is asking a lot, often of very young actors, because they often wear nothing except, a bit of coverage of the genitalia. They're just out of view, let's say 99% of the time, and they're having to, make the movements and sounds of sex in front of a crew. As far as I know, correct me, that the industry standard would be to, when you shoot something like this, you are, again, at least the most sensitive part is covered up first. You're going to have a minimized crew, and all footage ideally is handled sensitively. And ideally, right, there'll be, we'll get into intimacy coordinators, but I don't know. First, can you take us through is there any standards emerging now of how to handle a scene like that? And then of course the whole big question, even if you handle them a bit more sensitively, so that, which I've heard so many times, even famous actors saying like they had to get drunk to do it. They'll just sit in an interview and say, I had to get drunk to get through this. Then also just the whole question of, should we be doing them? Even if we make them a bit safer, should we be doing them? There's two big questions. So take it wherever you want to take it.
Well, I mean, most people probably are somewhat aware of the fact that most of these sex scenes are not very sexy on the set. Like, they are closed sets. Yes, in general, minimal crew. And it's really awkward. Like, there's no other way to really describe it except it's very awkward. Like, there's nothing sexy about it. Like, these guys are doing the most acting they probably will ever do, trying to make the scene look like two people who are actually deeply desiring each other, because it's awkward to get directions. It doesn't, I can't imagine as an actor that it doesn't ever not feel like porn, because you're in the thick of it being like, I don't know why I'm doing this, and I mean, like, I've only done this to a certain degree, like in terms of like, where I've had to shoot short scenes where like I'm kissing someone or someone is kissing someone, and even that I'm like, it's really weird. I mean, to be fair, like, I wouldn't even, like, I when I was in high school, I remember I had a friend who used to have like so many pictures of herself like kissing her boyfriend on camera, and just like putting that all over her computer, like as like a wallpaper thing. And I was just like, I can't even do that. Like, and this is with my actual partner. Like, for the cameras, it just never feels natural. Like, that's me personally. Like, I don't know how everybody else feels about this. I think it's always weird. It's weird when you're doing any kind of intimacy, let alone sex specifically. But like, the way that these sex scenes are framed is just very technical. I'm sure some of them have had to drink, because obviously it's weird to do and you feel looser, maybe, I don't know. But in general, even the non-drinking ones who get on that set, it's just never not awkward. It's very much the energy of like let's just get this over with so that we can move on to the other scenes. Because you have a strategized day, and like the day will have like 4 different things you might have to shoot in a specific location, right? So like, if you've got 4 scenes that take place in someone's bedroom, and like 2 of them are fights, one of them is a casual conversation, one of them is a sex scene, you're going to try to get through the most difficult stuff first. At least that's what I do as a director. I like other directors have a different process, but in general, the concept is you want to retain the acting juice as early as you can, which means you want them to go through the more difficult stuff. And also, let me just be very clear here. Difficult doesn't always mean sexual in this situation. I just recently had a conversation with an actor friend of mine who was playing a nurse in a show where there's a scene that involves women being lobotomized in a mental institution. And her co-actor had to restrain the woman, and the woman is like begging for escape. And he was like deeply uncomfortable, obviously. And he was like, we needed an intimacy coordinator for this particular scene, because it's like, my job in this scene is to restrain her, but I'm unaware of how much I should be restraining her that won't actually hurt the real actor in front of me, because I have to make it believable. You know what I mean? And this is traumatizing for us both, because we're pulling out some emotions in this scene that's traumatizing. This woman is about to get lobotomized. I'm restraining her so that she can get lobotomized. But as a real life person who's doing the scene, I actually have to physically restrain her, which means there's a chance I could hurt her because I have to restrain her so she doesn't escape. And her job in the scene is to try to escape. And so, you know, when we look at intimacy coordination, we're only looking at choreography of sex scenes, but there's a lot of really traumatizing things that happen in set that are psychologically traumatizing as well. And in the grander scheme of things, when it comes to just the way that sex scenes are filmed, from an emotional ask of the actors specifically, it's very technical in a way that's not sexy. It's very like, let's get this over with. Thankfully, on my personal sets, I've never had to shoot a scene like that. But in situations where I have been on those sets, and I'm not usually the person they call in if I'm writing it, obviously, it's very limited crew, you know. And sometimes actors can make requests, but it really does come down to how much power that actor has individually or how much sway they have with the director. Because you could be a female actress that says, I just want all female crew on that set. Right? Like, I want everybody on that set on that particular day, the gaffers, everyone to be a woman. If the director's a man, it's like, okay, you can be the only guy that's there, but everybody else besides the guy I'm having sex with is a woman. Just so that it doesn't feel like there's a bunch of men staring at you while you're getting naked, you know? And it's still unpleasant. It doesn't change how unpleasant it is as a task, you know. And I don't particularly think very highly of it, even from like an artistic standpoint, as very high art, because it doesn't, what is the point of shooting certain scenes is, from a storytelling perspective, it has to make sense to the actual story and move the plot along, right? And can the scene not be shot? My question whenever I do these kinds of scenes or write these kinds of scenes is always, is there no other way to do this that's more sensitive to the actors that still gets my message across without me having to bring this particular thing out of them, right? Where it's like, if I'm trying to say that like these two characters had a one night stand, there's a way of doing that that's dignified without having to resort to this. I often feel like, really, when you look at a lot of the key decision making when it comes to this, is not really like an artistic choice as much as it is either A, the voyeuristic desires of the director himself, like Sam Levinson, for example, or B, they know that the horny guys who watch their show are coming in for that scene specifically. And so it's a moneymaker. Yeah. Because the actor, for example, Sydney Sweeney, is probably like, those scenes are taken and spliced and used all over all of the pornographic sites, and they're put all over Reddit and stuff. And so it's like, oh, people will come in, like the way that people used to think about Bollywood, where it's like, people will come in for this actress because of the song, and she's going to make the song a big deal. That's the kind of mentality they're using for that sex scene, where it's like, she's selling the show. You know what I mean? Like, they may not stay, the men will not stay for the plot of Euphoria. Like, what is the audience for Euphoria? It's probably like teenagers to mid-20 somethings of a certain age who are primarily women, maybe some gay men, right? How do we get the horny men who are a huge demographic to watch the show? They're not going to watch the show. They will watch the sex scenes, and the sex scenes will be popular, and we'll get some money, we'll get our ad revenue back or whatever. We'll be able to convince the studio to give us another season because look at our viewership. We got the target audience of male viewers, 18 to 35. And it's like, no, you didn't. You got them in for a specific scene that you're using as bait. You know what I mean? And you're using a woman to do it. That's really it.
And I don't even think that it's, it's not even about the quiet part out loud. Like it is the out loud part. It is, I think it is culturally acknowledged in the mainstream that like, oh, like this movie where so and so has a topless scene, like it's always been kind of part of the zeitgeist. And I'm so glad that you brought that up, because really explicitly it is softcore pornography. It is softcore video prostitution in that sense. It's not even that it mirrors it, but functionally it's the same thing. I wanted to speak real quick to what you were just saying about the sex scenes and that weird energy and that weird vibe that it puts the room into, and it puts the people into. As soon as you started talking about that, I started thinking about sexual harassment in the workplace or in public or in whatever situation, going back to like grade school, the boys would harass the girls by making moaning sounds, right? I think
Yeah,
many
yeah, yeah.
many girls have experienced this. Why is that sexual harassment? And I think it's because humans have an instinct to, you know, keep their sexual responses to certain safe situations with safe, trusted individuals. And when
Yeah.
you can put somebody against their will into a sexual state, whether it's, physical sexual response or, even just thinking about response, it triggers this, oh, I need to cover this up, it's almost shame response. And I think that it is very deliberate, what you're describing, putting the female actresses through this kind of ritualized, filmed,
Hmm.
I would say, I would call it sexual abuse. I do, because it's sexual harassment when it happens in public, but when it
Hmm.
happens at work, it's not like, um, and it
Yeah.
and it triggers this kind of, survival, this really fight or flight nervous system activation, which
Hmm.
puts that person into a more vulnerable state to be otherwise manipulated and exploited. I think,
Hmm. Hmm.
like you said, even when it doesn't push the plot, there's the pimp aspect of selling the women's sexuality, and then there's also the practical aspect of keeping the people involved, in a vulnerable, susceptible state.
Yeah. Also, I mean, when you work with certain kinds of female directors in general, there's like a big distinction between the ones who understand that, like, I think women have a much wider, uh what's the word I'm looking for? Much wider vocabulary for intimacy than men do. Because we've been socialized to consider forms of intimacy with each other as well, like hugging, touching each other, words of affirmation. And let me make my point here. When we're talking about the way in which scenes show intimacy, especially between two characters, there's a huge number of ways you can do that without resorting to pornified depictions of sex specifically, right? Especially when you're talking about how the love between two people are building, or even the lusts between two people are building, as characters, right? But I think if you ask most men what a lack of intimacy means in their relationships, they'll almost automatically say no sex. They don't see it as, she doesn't touch me, she doesn't hug me, she never kisses me on the cheek, she never, ruffles my hair in an affectionate manner. Like, they never think of
Mhm.
that as intimacy. They think of only sex as intimacy. And so when you look at like the way that male directors say we need to show that they are intimate with each other, it's almost always graphic sex. It's almost always like he's had his way with her, like she's his now. Because their
Mhm.
idea is that sex is an act of domination on a woman, not something that they mutually agree to that is mutually enjoyable for each other. And so it's very much like even the way that the sex positions are filmed. You know what I mean? It's like if he is having a one night stand with his character and he doesn't give a fuck about her, like the way that he fucks her is very different from if it's a wife or a person that we as an audience is supposed to respect, right? Like and also like trying to say certain things about her personality in based on the positions, like if she's cowgirl, she's a confident woman who knows her, like Sex of the City is very
Mhm.
interesting about this. Like we're going to have a discussion about Sex of the City someday, I hope. But like the way that, for example, that they showed Samantha in her sex scenes versus Charlotte in her sex scenes, Charlotte wants to be the wife, so she's not going to do anything that's going to make her look too sexually aggressive. But Samantha has no desire to be a wife. So all of her scenes are her with her breasts out, cowgirl or doing something very adventurous. And Charlotte is, missionary position, kiss on the cheek kind of, like, and this is a very male way of looking at sex. And honestly, specifically with Sex in the City, it's a very gay male way of looking at sex because most of the people who ran that show were gay men. And gay men have this whole top and bottom, I'm dominant, you're submissive kind of dynamic, which if you're actually having sex with people, I like looking at it as a wrestling match competition of who is on top and who is on the bottom is very pointless. Really, the measure of success should be, are we mutually invested in each other's orgasm, which is never the point of these sex scenes, right? It's never like this man is like, it's my desire to make sure you enjoy yourself as much as possible. It's always like, I got this, babe. Right. And so it's like you can show intimacy in so many other ways. And I think if you look at female directors and the way that they depict, especially even in K-dramas, the way that they show relationships blossoming between people, there's so many steps before they even kiss, let alone before they ever sleep together. You know what I mean? Like ways in which to be thoughtful and considerate of this other person that show that he thinks of her in a special way, more importantly than the other women in his life. You know what I mean? But that's almost never heard of in American media anymore. And I'm not surprised that many of these men see sex with a woman as like the ultimate marker of victory, as opposed to like, that's why even the collecting of numbers, like, oh, I'm just gonna hit out the same pickup lines on 20 different women and the one that bites wins. You know what I mean? Like, I win this woman. Like, it's very gamified. It's very, and everything in our consciousness now, especially with like dating apps and stuff, has turned it into a gamified system. And I mean, don't even get me started on these dating apps, because like nothing feels more like catalog bride, like selection of prostitution than those apps. Like, we are the product and we are essentially being sold for free. Like, our data, our bodies, like that's being sold as the major bait for these companies to their men. And they're trying to sell these men on, buying subscriptions and stuff. Essentially, like we're not consenting to it, but we're getting pimped out there too. So it's like everything about the way that like the media functions now and the way that they depict intimacy between like the heterosexual people is very based on domination, and it's very based on like to show that this man is a successful alpha male in his society, he needs to be bedding a bunch of different women, and we need to show that in graphic detail and show the position so that we can show how he is in relation to her. Is he on top? Is he doing X, Y, and Z? It's never like, have you noticed, it's never the sex scenes where he's like eating her out or something. It's always like penetrative. It's always like, oh, he's taking her from behind or something. It's always about making sure that she seems as like she's a recipient. You know what I mean? She's never really participating. And that's the thing, when you look at the way that the men shoot, and I think Euphoria is very interesting in this regard. The men that shoot that scene, they do it very intentionally. Like the way that they depict the way that the women are perceived. I'm not saying that if you're shot in a different way, it means you're any less degraded. Let me just start off there. Like, because either way, you're put in a dehumanized position as an actor. But it's interesting the way that they're using these scenes as a way to showcase what the character's relative position of power is in relation to the male figure. And if you look at like the way the women shoot it, either some of them straight up avoid shooting sex scenes altogether. Like, there's many women who I think who are just going to be like, we don't need to do this. We'll find another way to show that these guys are into each other that doesn't involve this. Or they don't shoot them in these ways that are incredibly dehumanizing, because I think most women who are in that position are going to relate to the female character and be like, I don't like that at all. And I don't want to be shown in that position. And I don't want to make an actor act in that position. And I don't want to show that to an audience either. Like, there is a way for them to show, intimacy that doesn't involve this very, very pornified view of sex.
Yeah. There's so much in what you said, so much I want to pick up on. Like, one, I keep coming back to K-dramas because for all their flaws, and we could list those as well. A K-drama will usually have 16 episodes for the whole show, and they might not kiss till like episode 12, 13, 14. Like that is a slow burn that I feel like American television cannot imagine. And then the other thought I had, that was my go-to example, I think many people's go-to example when it comes to nude scenes, sex scenes, rape scenes, obviously is Game of Thrones. There's so much that you could do an entire stream on Game of Thrones. They did actually recruit women from the porn industry overtly to shoot some of the more explicit scenes. And then there's an example of at least one actress, I don't have her name, more minor actress who was, had her film debut in Game of Thrones and then went into the porn industry after, who saw that as a logical next step, or who was funneled rather. And then also I'm always thinking about Emilia Clarke, who was, I'm actually not sure how old she was, but she plays Daenerys, like one of the lead characters or the lead character. and obviously had a lot of nude scenes, rape scenes, and I don't know the exact trajectory, but I'm assuming eventually got a no nudity clause.
You know what the crazy part is about? I know the scene you're talking about with Daenerys where she gets raped by Khal Drogo, right? And that's like an early season 1 scene where she's raped by the guy who's effectively her husband, and that she was sold to, by the way. Like, she was sold to him by
By her brother.
Yeah. The crazy part is the actual book, he never rapes her. He waits for, I mean, of course she's 14, so, you know,
Yeah,
let's take this with a ginormous grain of salt. But the point is that, like, in that actual story, like, he actually waits until she's ready to do it before he does it. And in the show, they intentionally made a choice for her to be raped. Okay, bear in mind, this is weird enough already because it's a child marriage. Like, it's not like it's any better. But to intentionally take, like, you know, try to adapt a book and then be like, well, in this scene, she doesn't get raped. Like, he respectfully waits for her until she's ready, and then turning that into, oh, he definitely rapes her, is a choice, you know. And again, it's a choice being made by men because it's bad enough. It's already bad enough. You know what I mean? It's a scene where a woman is being sold into sexual slavery by her own brother. She's an underage person. I mean, this is like, I don't know what time period you want to call Game of Thrones, but like, obviously it's a parallel timeline. But the point is, like, the rules of their society and the rules of engagement for the women is almost the same as it would be in, I would say, medieval era England or something, you know, where it's like there are certain women that are highborn, that are being pimped by their own family members to other royal families. And then there's a brothel system of women who are of no noble lineage, who are basically like a free-for-all for all the men. Doesn't matter noble or not noble, you know? And that the show sets that stake up very clearly. So to intentionally choose, again, to show a rape scene in a situation where there was no rape scene, you know, and then the crazy part is we have to root for their love story for like another 2 seasons. And I was like, what? What do you mean? How are we trying to sell this guy as the good husband? You know, he would have been an okay husband at best if you follow the book version of him.
And you know how they made it up to the audience? Because they did get backlash for a lot of this. There was a lot of like, you're using female bodies. Why are you doing this to the actresses? What do? They do a completely unnecessary close-up of a man's penis, like some side character. Unfortunately, I have it seared in my mind because I did watch the show like a decade ago. And some like actor, like an actor, a play actor in the Game of Thrones world. And we get a close-up shot of him like pulling back his foreskin and asking somebody if if there's something wrong with his penis, and that is supposed to so getting having a man expose himself to the audience is supposed to make up for the objectification of the women and the voyeurism towards the women, which I was like, this is beyond parody.
Yeah, and that of course is an escalation of the sexual harassment, right? Because that's many predators use exposing their penis as a way to stun and again put their victims in a state of freeze and fawn and you know that kind of fight or flight state. And you know, Diana, as you were talking about, you know, directors choosing these more and more graphic and more violent, and also layering in like you said about the woman who wears a certain dress, that's this type of woman, and now it has progressed to the point of the woman who is in this sexual position explicitly shown is this kind of woman. You know, there's this whole kind of language of symbolism going on. Yeah, and I think that you know what I said earlier about this experience putting the actors in this kind of vulnerable, you know, a triggered state. I think it also has the same effect on the audience. And I think women are being gaslit en masse. You know, it's just entertainment. It's just, you know, it's just the human body. It's sexuality. You should put away your shame. You shouldn't be a prude. And they're sitting next to men watching these scenes that are very triggering. And again, do the same thing to the human body as when men are sexually harass women by showing them pornography in the workplace or you know in school setting or any of that. But now it's on the big screen and it's sanctioned and everybody is just like I said, gaslighting every single woman to the point of madness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's very interesting. Like America is kind of a unique case, and I don't know much about the UK to comment on the UK's culture specifically, because in my experience, because they were a Victorian society, they've always, on average, probably been way more prudish than American society. But in America, it was very interesting to me as a culture shock that it's almost like a bad thing to be considered a prude, in a way that, like, chastity is
Yeah.
a really important value in most societies, like having some level of modesty and not being too sexually open, at least like in public, you know what I mean, like
Mhm.
regardless of what your personal proclivities are or what you want to do in the privacy of your bedroom with your partner. Nobody's really talking about sex that openly with each other in, like, Asian
Mhm.
societies. Let me say Asia specifically. But in America, like, if you have like genuine misgivings or a genuine hesitation to a certain kind of sex act or a certain kind of depiction of sex or a certain kind of hypersexualization of
Mhm.
media, you're like there's nothing worse you could be called than a prude, which I think is so weird.
Yep.
You know
And
what I mean?
and
Like, it's like,
it's 100%. I've absolutely experienced this my whole adult life, and it's associated with, again, the right wing. This kind of, if you express those misgivings, or not even misgivings, but just boundaries, just sexual boundaries, in
yeah,
public, um, you're associated with the religious right and anti-progressivism and bigotry and racism. Like, there's this forced teaming where.
yeah, exactly.
And so I think we've, yeah, spent the last hour painting a pretty clear picture of the different types of abuse of the person in front of the camera, behind the camera, watching, etc. There are a few ways to mitigate the impact, at least on the actors. I really want to get into intimacy coordinators, but I don't want to skip over buddy doubles, which I'm still learning on what their exact role is. But just one example, in Pretty Woman, which we'll discuss at some point in coming weeks or months. Um, Actually, Julia Roberts, who just, famously, that's her breakout role. That's the whole other thing. Like, how many actresses have been Oscar nominated or won an Oscar for portraying a sexually exploited woman? It's some ridiculous
Mm-hmm.
number, like I think
Mm-hmm.
14, 15, or 16. It's really crazy number. And anyway, Julia Roberts, it's not her body on the infamous movie poster where she's like leaning up against Richard Gere. It's actually a different woman's
Mhm,
body, and they just spliced
mhm.
Julia's
Mm-hmm.
head onto it. And
Wow.
so I had, and there's been a few times where I've heard of body doubles sort of having the role of, well, the actress doesn't want to show her breasts or doesn't want to show her butt or doesn't, or even like legs or other parts. And therefore we'll have a different person step in and we'll make it,
Mm-hmm.
we'll edit it in a way that it looks like it's her. Although
Mm-hmm.
you've since corrected me, body doubles have a little more of a role than just that. But can you elaborate on what they do on set and what that
um
means for an actor?
the boring thing is that it can sometimes be a scheduling thing, right? So the actor, for example, if they're committed to multiple movies or they have multiple scenes to shoot in a specific day and there's just no time, sometimes for a time cut, like a body double will come in to do their portion of the scene where they don't have any lines and where you're just getting like a shot from the back. So it's more like again, a technical thing more than anything. Of course, there's also stunt doubles who are there to, do things. And also it's like a liability thing when it comes to stunt doubles specifically, because the safety of the actor has to be protected. If the actor gets hurt, it's very hard to replace them. Of course, this also means that there have been many stunt doubles that have gotten hurt and even died on set. I believe in Harry Potter, there's actually a person that passed away. And so, yeah,
Mhm,
there's like stunt doubles are people who just deserve so much credit for the work that they do, because it's obviously intensely labor intensive, and they're very skilled at like whatever martial arts or craft or whatever they do, and it's a dangerous job. It's a very dangerous job. One of my friends is a stunt lady, and she's been on like she's been a body on what is it, Special Victims Unit, SVU, and she's done Grey's Anatomy, and she's basically been like the corpse under the tarp for like a lot of shows where she's just been lying around essentially. And it's like sometimes there's a real actor, like, they'll cast like uh Jenna Ortega as body that's murdered, woman that's murdered in a dorm, but then Jenna Ortega has like 3 other shows she has to shoot, so she's not going to be the actual body under the tarp. They'll just hire a stunt double that looks similar to her that they keep under the tarp, and you get paid for that. Like, so it's not always like sex related. Sometimes it's also just scheduling related, depending on the actor, like if they've got a bunch of other stuff going on. Also, I think I told you the story about how there was an actor in Bollywood that wouldn't show up on set unless it was a close-up, and the female actress that had to work with him was very pissed off because she had to act with a cardboard cutout of him, and she was like, I'm never working with him again. And yeah, you think they could cast like a stunt double for the back, which they did. I'm sure they got a body double just to do like the scenes where you're shooting him from the back, but yeah, sometimes you just get like a particularly dramatic diva actor guy who's like, I'm too big for this and I don't want to show up because I don't want to do anything where you can't see my face, so I'm just not going to show up unless they shoot me the days that I have my face on. And then you have this body double who the actor has to shoot with, or like in her case, the poor thing, a cardboard cutout. And yeah, sometimes you just get incredibly difficult actors who are, on a power trip. But yes, of course, the negative of it is that yes, they can be used in this like very sexually exploitative manner, but body doubles are used for a whole variety of different kinds of shoots, and it really sometimes just comes down to scheduling, or if in the same day that person has other scenes where they have to be shot from the front and like they have dialogue with the other actor, and so it's like we just need shots where we're shooting over the shoulder of our character and like looking at the person that she's acting with. So it depends on that too.
So I think this is oh, sorry, I was just quickly going to finish that part and then you can come in, Siljo.
I had a question about what Diana was just saying real quick, if you don't mind.
Yes.
My question is, you described all of these like different roles that a body double could play. Would it be this? Is it the same actors doing body doubling? In other words, if there's that, would they be doing the sexual scenes as well as the other more mundane scenes, or would there be particular like people who specialize in doing the sexual scenes as opposed to the other stuff?
In my experience, they do everything because the actor will have a couple of body doubles that are like they're like that particular body double is booked and busy for that particular actor. They're often called in for a lot of that actor's movies, and they tend to be the stand-in body double for that person. That's generally been my experience, is that they'll have 2 or 3 people that are their usual body doubles, and that person makes a career out of being that person's body double. So Tom Cruise will have Tom Cruise famously does not use stunt doubles. He does all of his own stunts on Mission Impossible. That's a personal choice. Most studios would be very against it because of liability, right? Like a lot of actors are not even allowed to drive themselves to set. They have chauffeurs that the studio provides them to drive them back and forth from set, because obviously if an actor gets hurt or sick, they're very difficult to replace because they're central to the shoot. So if you're shooting a scene where the person's face is not necessarily shown or they don't have any dialogue, the body double will be used, but that same body double will probably be used for all the other films that they do as well. So yes, it could include sex scenes, but it also depends on how often that actor has sex scenes in movies, because they might have sex scene in one movie and then the other 3 that they're working on don't. But they'll still need a body double for the other 3 because maybe there are scenes that are being shot from over their shoulder or something where they, like even in my film, the first film I did, me and the actor actually looked really similar to each other from the back. So in scenes when she was busy rehearsing or doing something else, like I would be the stand-in for her. So I was a body double. You know what I mean? Like I was not an effective body double. I mean, actually, maybe I was the greatest body double that ever existed because my only job was to stand there, really. But it's more to get like, the director will want to know where to shoot from, what angle is the most emotional for like, eye-to-eye contact, or just to get the general height of the camera, that sort of like different kind of boring reasons, to be honest with you, not necessarily anything. But yes, like specifically since we're focusing on the sexual exploitation aspect of it, very often they might not have a specific, I don't know whether this is a thing, but I've definitely not been in a situation where there's been a body double specifically for the sex scenes. You know what I mean?
Right.
They usually have a stand-in body double, and that body double will do almost everything.
And I think
sorry I interrupted you, Elly.
Oh, no worries. I think this is a good example of how watching movies and television gives you a wrong idea about something, because my only knowledge about body doubles was Love Actually. The Martin Freeman and his co-star, I forgot her name, unfortunately, are two body doubles shooting a sex scene, and then they fall in love with each other on set. Actually, actors falling in love with each other is a whole rabbit hole, a complicated one, I can imagine. But point being, I saw Love Actually and thought, oh, that's what body doubles do. They have to do nude scenes. And it's good to know that that is not all they do. Still, where did I want to take it? Well, I just remember seeing Love Actually and thinking, well, they are talking in Love Actually about how difficult and uncomfortable it is to shoot, but it must have still been difficult, uncomfortable to actually shoot it. You know, there's like a
yeah. I mean, it's always difficult and uncomfortable regardless of whether you or somebody else is doing it, because somebody else has to absorb the discomfort. Like, but the only difference is that with certain established actors, there's probably some body doubles they've been using for years. Like J-Lo, for example, probably has a body double she's been using her entire life, you know, for most of her acting career. I just saw an episode recently of 30 Rock where one of the episodes, the main character goes to a vintage store and she gets this amazing pair of jeans that makes her butt look really amazing. And she turns around and like she's looking in the mirror and like her friend is like, "Oh my God, your butt looks amazing in those jeans." But the person that they use for the shot where she's turning around is not her, it's a body double. Because she doesn't have that kind of butt. And the point is to make the jeans look really good on her. And so they used a body double for her for all the shots where she was turning around or walking away from frame and everybody was commenting on how great her butt looked in those jeans, you know? And then she finds out that the jeans was actually owned by like a child sweatshop, and like the whole thing about an episode being like, oh my God, I enjoy this thing so much that's actually super exploitative. And I'm like, it's very ironic that we use body doubles to sell you that message. But yeah, I mean, like they're used in scenes where it's not even necessarily sexual, but just like, oh, for the point of the joke, we have to find a body double who looks as much as Tina Fey as she possibly can, but with a bigger ass. You know what I mean? Just to make that joke relevant.
Yeah.
So it's like that's the point, is that you can use them for so many things, and some people make their entire career just being like one actor's body double. So they're called in for everything.
That would have been one of my questions, was are any of these body doubles like struggling actors, aspiring actors, or you know, is that something they want to break out of and they have a hard time, or some people just specialize and under the right circumstances it's not a bad deal?
I don't know how much of a good deal it is now, because actors are not paid the way that they used to be. Like we often look at actor salaries specifically from like the A-list, and it's just not relevant to what the average actor makes. Most actors I know, they have multiple other kinds of jobs, day jobs and flexible jobs that allow them to take acting jobs. Like that's why you see so many in the service industry, because it's probably the only career where you can just jump off on a whim and go and take an audition. Now, with everything being self-tapes online and being able to send everything online, it's become much easier. So people are able to have more regular, sort of like stable 9-to-5s and just self-tape in their own free time and send it over. Before it was like you had to physically be in person audition, which meant that you had to have a job that was flexible enough for you to take time off of work. Now it's the self-tape era, so everybody just tapes themselves and then sends it into like a platform, Actors Access or Backstage or something. So it's made it easier for them to take regular jobs, which is not the situation before, but the compensation model for actors has become very shrunk. So, and that's just for regular actors, you know what I mean? I'm not talking even about body doubles specifically. I think if you're an established body double for a very established actor, you're probably still doing well. Like the person that I spoke to, my friend who was a stunt woman, she lives off of her residuals that she made for all of these shows. So she can travel and take time off of work and then come back into work whenever she wants. You know, and again, stunt people are probably paid way more because there is a danger aspect to their job. And so the liability for them is higher. So they're just paid and compensated more. I don't know how profitable it is to just purely be a body double. I think obviously many of them are happy to get into their own role, but it's kind of like the thought process is, if I'm getting money doing a side hustle, why wouldn't I? You know, if body doubling is my side hustle, but I would break it into the industry, then but doubling still allows me to be on set, mingling and networking with producers and directors on the set. And who knows, maybe tomorrow, if I go in for an audition, they'll remember me, remember what a good job I did on that film of theirs, and then cast me. So I haven't spoken to enough body doubles to know whether that is their long-term plan. They're perfectly happy staying body doubles. I know the ones who make great money working for the A-list actors probably are fine in their position, but it's relative, like any other job.
Yeah. So we've talked so much about how challenging and uncomfortable for everyone except some creep who's titillated any type of intimacy or nudity on film is, which I think should always have us, we should always remind ourselves people exploited in the porn industry have to do like 100 times worse than what's happening here. And if like a kissing scene, a makeout scene is challenging for actors, well, the only way that you can think that the porn industry is totally fine is again to think that there's this whole separate class of people whose boundaries and discussed thresholds or whatever it might be work totally different than yours, who can like totally just dissociate or cut themselves off, or who are really just that horny. That's the only way that you can believe that the porn industry is not traumatizing. If Hollywood actors, even some A-listers, talk about getting drunk to do pretend intimacy, people doing actual sex acts in front of cameras, which is what the porn industry is, you would have to be completely delulu to not think that they're having to be on substances, they're suffering, they're distressed, they're being predated on. So that's just something I want to keep coming back to. But there's a little bit of hope in all this mess, at least when it comes to the film industry, because there is an emergent profession of people in charge of diminishing the amount of harassment, discomfort, abuse, at least in the direct shoots, which is intimacy coordinators. And I was a little pessimistic. I was like, are the studios just hiring them to protect themselves from lawsuits? Is that... It's kind of like we had an intimacy coordinator, now you can't complain. But what you told me in our pre-chat was a little more encouraging, that it felt like, no, a lot of these people do take that job very seriously. They do consider themselves advocates for these often young, often female actors in these sensitive scenes. So can you tell us how this intimacy coordination works and what's happening there in the industry?
So there isn't an official training module that I know that intimacy coordinators have to take, but there are plenty of workshops, some of them run by like SAG itself. So I had a friend who recently asked me to write her a recommendation letter for one of these programs, and she's based out of New England. And there's definitely like a training workshop on like what exactly their role entails. I hope that there's a more standardized and legal framework for which the intimacy coordinators are expected to operate from, that there's like a baseline training that's afforded to all of them. There might be already, I don't know, because I'm not specifically in that profession, and the profession is fairly new. So I don't know how much they've standardized processes, which I think is like, you kind of have to see it as like another arm of HR, where it's like, these guys have a responsibility. They're all trained in a similar way to execute their job in a similar way. And so escalation of conflict is done in a structured manner. That's the hope. I don't know that that's what they do. So I can't, like, maybe there are actual intimacy coordinators who can weigh on this, because with my friend's situation, for example, there was an actual training program that she was trying to enter that was specifically for a company. But in terms of what they actually do on set, one aspect of it, like we were talking about the scene earlier where a person was telling me about how they were shooting a scene in like a mental asylum, and there's an actor who had to like figure out whether, like he had to make the scene convincing enough to look like he was restraining this woman, but at the same time he was very worried about hurting her. I do think that like if you're a human person with a heart at all, you're gonna think twice about like how you shoot and like do a scene in general, whether you're slapping someone or hitting someone or pushing someone, shoving, like our human response in general to like doing something like that is to be concerned. You can't really fake it to the degree where like it's hard to make it look believable, and there used to be like, what would they call like slap takes and stuff where you're like pretend slapping someone but it's actually you're slapping your own hand and stuff. There was like trickery of the cameras and trickery of like body movement that was taught to actors in the past on like how to show a scene where it's like I'm hitting this person and they're turning, but I'm not actually making contact with the person's face. It's just like the camera cuts at the right time, and then instead you see like the woman holding her face or whatever. So it's like there's way to do it without actually hurting the person. Of course, people have gotten lazier. That's the other aspect of it as well. With like AI and all of these things, it's like, yes, now we have all these things that come in to let us do this on screen, but do it with CGI or do it in a way that doesn't involve two people actually touching each other. But then there are some people who don't have that budget that just get lazy about it, and they're like, just hit her. Like, I think there was this Meryl Streep, when she had done, I think, Kramer versus Kramer, the actor that she worked with on that had actually hit her before the scene started, and so she was pissed, and the feelings that were coming out of her were like real. But like, he had hit her before that, and she was mad at him, and they had like a huge they had huge beef on that shoot, if I'm not mistaken. But she was like, but it added to our tension, you know what I mean, like we had on the set. But I was like, but was that necessary? And like, that would not be allowed. Like, that would not be allowed now.
Was it Dustin Hoffman? I think he's a co-star in that. Was it him?
Yeah, I'm just gonna Google that right now.
Am I mixing up all my actors now? I think
yes,
I've seen that film.
It was Dustin Hoffman. Yeah.
That is so disgusting.
Yeah, so he, like, before they were to shoot a scene, he slapped her as an improvisation, but she wasn't like told. It was like an unscripted sort of slap, and I think it was shot.
That's called assault. That's called assault and battery. Like, that's battery. That's insane.
Yep. And she was like, oh, he overstepped the mark or whatever, and I was like,
no, he committed a crime.
And
everybody let him.
Yep. So that's the thing. It's like, I mean, back then there might have been like zero legal protections at all. Like what Kramer versus Kramer came out, the 80s, I think, maybe 70s, maybe 80s. But
there were still laws against hitting people.
Yeah, but I think in this situation, like, I'm just reading up on it. And it seems like he slapped her on screen as an improv thing. So sometimes there's like a legal loophole where it's like, if he was just hitting her behind the scenes, like as a way to rile her up for the shot, then that could be perceived as
because illegal. The cameras were on.
But because the cameras were on and it was for the scene, it can be attributed to the actor was just really in the zone. And that's the thing about legal stuff,
parallel
right?
with pornography.
Exactly.
Prostitution is illegal, but if the camera is on.
Oh, and you don't think that male porn stars, in quotation marks, will improvise sexual abuse, additional sexual abuse? You don't think they do that? They do.
No, they definitely do.
Hundreds of thousands.
But that's the thing. It's like, that's why the intimacy coordinators became kind of essential, because it's like, oh, now these are choreographed. Now you have a person who's like, okay, I understand that I'm working with this, say, young new actor who doesn't know anybody, who's not powerful, who has no connections. Her father is not a producer. Her father is not a big shot director. She has no way to push back against, okay, let's assume that she's having a sex scene with like Chris Evans, right? She can't push back against Chris Evans. He's huge. She can't push back against the director because maybe he's Christopher Nolan. He's huge. She can't push back against the studio because the studio is like, I don't know, Paramount or Columbia, and they're huge. So she can't like vocalize any discomfort at all about anything that she's doing in the scene. But through the intimacy coordinator, she has a way to vocalize her concerns. And the intimacy coordinator's job is to basically they kind of have a very challenging job, and their job is to keep all parties happy. The man and the woman in the scene, and like all of the stakeholders in the film. And there have been, like, Sam Levinson has like made fun of intimacy coordinators in like his show The Idol. Like there was a scene where like The Weeknd locked up the intimacy coordinator in a bathroom, and he's like made them seem like they don't really have an important role. But I think not just from a legal perspective, of course, I never think that anything in the industry is done out of goodwill. I definitely do think, to a certain extent, yes, the intimacy coordinators are brought in to prevent the studio and like, actors / directors from experiencing any lawsuits. But that being said, the fact that there is a third party there through which requests can be made and like agreements can be reached, and like scenes can be coordinated and choreographed in a way that is very similar to staging, like you would do in a play. Because in a play, like, you have blocking and staging and stuff that you have to do as well on, who stands where. And obviously in a play, if you have a scene where like there's a character that shoots someone or brutalizes someone, you have to do it in a way that's like, you're not actually hurting the person. You know what I mean? Because and stage has a way of doing that where it's like, you can show it without actually hurting the person. But in a film, like, you have to actually be a pretty good director to be like, okay, I'm shooting the scene from second 1 of you raising your hand to second 3 when you almost make contact with the person's face, and then I'm cutting it to this person turning and looking the other way. You know what I mean? So that way you don't actually have to make those people in the scene act out the situation, even if that's what happened. Like, say that you're doing a biopic and this is what happened, like Michael did this, like the film Michael that came out recently. I noticed that they had similar sort of staging. And that's the thing, right? It's like you're talking about a real life person that was actually abused by their dad. The way to do that without actually having to like brutalize a child is like dad takes off a belt and closes the door. So you kind of get what's going to happen behind that door, and they do that in that scene. There is a scene where like he hits the boy, but I think it's like a stage hit. It's not really like a action. Obviously, children's rights are up for grabs right now in the States, but I definitely think that even they would be like, you can't actually assault a child on a set just for the sake of showing that like this kid had an abusive dad. You know what I mean? But it's like, like with certain,
could you do it? Could you do it outside of the scene with just like the example you gave earlier? There's a loophole, the cameras are running, but then nobody sees that footage. I'm just saying, like, it's a slippery slope.
No, I mean, now they have actual legal protections in where you actually can't do some of the stuff that you could do back in the day with like Meryl Streep shooting. Like they've thought through things since, you know what I mean? But
That's encouraging.
It's one of those situations where it's like you don't find out there is this one guy who's always trying to find the loophole and like the way that he can get away with doing the creepy shit, and he's the guy that actually often is the reason why we have the rules. You know what I mean? He's the reason why we now have liability clauses and why we have protections for actors this way, and why like certain things are done in specific ways. That guy kind of made us realize, oh, we need to start having rules around this shit so that there aren't more exploitative people. Like I remember it was Tippi Hedren. It's Dakota Johnson's grandmother. She shot this film with Alfred Hitchcock called The Birds, and he like tied up actual crows like by their beaks. Like he tied up the beaks of the crows and like flung them at her on a set and didn't tell them they were real birds. And she had like a avian phobia for the rest of her life. She was terrified of birds after that, because he basically had her stand on a scene and then flung a bunch of like actual crows at her. And the poor crows were tied up too. So it's like you're harming animals and also terrifying this woman. But she wasn't told any of that, and like they allowed him to do it because he's a genius or whatever. And yeah, he's a jerk. And lots of these men did incredibly insane, unhinged things way back when, and like we're looking at what they've done, and each time I think we're trying to change it a little bit, like more and more and more. I definitely think offset, you can no longer like smack an actor and be like, bring the best out of you, you know what I mean, feel the rage from my slap, and like now go and channel that into the scene. I definitely don't think that's allowed anymore. But improvisation probably is one of those things where it's like, for the sake of the shot, lots of people will let it go. And so the actors also, you have to remember, like these are, because they're so hierarchy oriented and because the hierarchy is often men, I'm sure that prostitutes and people who are sexually exploited who are on screen feel the same way. But if you're a woman on that set alone, you don't want to be the bad guy. You don't want to be the person who's like, oh, she's such a diva, she's just making everything such an issue, everything has to be an issue with her. So you won't vocalize your discomfort in the way that a more established actor would probably feel comfortable doing so. You know what I mean? Because they have power and they have the ability to walk off a set and be like, like J-Lo could do that. J-Lo could get on a set and be like, I'm the reason people are going to watch this movie. And if you don't do what I want, I'm going to walk. You know what I mean? And people will be like, I don't want to lose the money. So they won't let her do that,
You think so? Next week, everyone listening, tune in next week, because next week we'll be talking about Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni. And Blake Lively is a much, much, much bigger star than Justin Baldoni, and she's still got her reputation trashed in an organized smear campaign over being difficult and trying to take control of the set when objecting to various forms of harassment on camera and off. So we'll get into the details next week. The other potent example that you mentioned, Diana, in our pre-chat for where there's still lawlessness, which is, again, independent film. And you mentioned Honora. I didn't realize that there was an independent production, kind of where the producer went, yeah, we don't really have money for an intimacy coordinator. So can you tell us instead how they choreographed the sex scenes? Because I couldn't believe my ears when you told me.
Yeah, so just to be clear, like I know that Honora was shot on a much more modest budget. I don't know if they didn't have the money for an intimacy coordinator. I know that they actively chose not to use one. So it was different. I don't know if they've, I mean, of course, a lot of directors will come who are running shoestring budgets will come to it and be like, we can't afford an intimacy coordinator, and like, will you be chill and just like do this for us? So like, that's for like, when I said that, I meant that more for like smaller productions than even that are running like a budget of like, I don't know, $10,000 or something, where like, we need to put the scene, and like, pretty please, can you just be chill? But with Honora specifically, they chose not to use one, and that's because at the time the actress Mikey Madison was staying at the director's house. Well, like, again, this is like a cost-cutting thing, right? Like, they won't put them up in a hotel because it's a smaller production, so they're like, okay, just stay in our guest house or something, right? And so she got so close to them. You can find this interview. Mikey Madison had this, I can't remember, in like, if you just Google it, you'll find it. But Mikey Madison did an interview where she talked about like why they didn't use an intimacy coordinator, and she was like, well, I was so close to the director and his wife that we were like, we just don't need one because we're so comfortable with each other, and it would be much easier for him to directly give me his notes on like what he wanted the scene to look like. So he would play act how the scene should be shot with his wife. So he was like acting out the sex acts with his wife and demonstrating to Mikey Madison what he wanted her to do in that scene. Like what, and I was like, everything about what you just said is just so bizarre. Okay, like, you're living in the house with this person, you're a relatively unknown actor. Like, I don't know anything that she's been in before Honora, for what it's worth. I don't remember seeing her in anything. So she was like completely unknown. And you're staying in the house of this director guy with his wife, and they're like, oh, so for this scene we want you to like do this, and I'm guessing the wife is probably trying to show Mikey like what position she should be in and stuff. And I was like, everything about what you're trying to say is unhinged. Like, that doesn't sound any better than just hiring an actual intimacy coordinator to be like, how can we choreograph this scene? And she's like, but I felt so comfortable with them because I've been living with them for so long that we just deemed it unnecessary. And I think it's like a personal thing. Like, it's up to you if you want to use it or not. And like, this is where I disagree with her. I think that intimacy coordinators should be standard. Just like, even from a baseline, if you only give a shit about the legal aspects of it, like the protection of the actors and like I mean, I don't give a fuck about the corporations, but if it's only for the legal aspect of it, you should be having them there as a standard practice. You know what I mean? Because you're making an assumption, even in this interview, right? How do we know that she's not like, she's saying whatever she genuinely feels versus what she feels obliged to say because she doesn't want to ruin that relationship with that director, because now he's put her in an Oscar-winning movie. She won an Oscar because of that movie, and so she feels in debt to him in a way that she wouldn't ordinarily. And so she can't like come back after she's won the movie and been like, oh, well, he did some creepy ass shit with his wife and made me stay in his house and watch them play act like different positions of sex, and I had to like reenact them with the other actor when we were on set. Like, anybody who's going to hear that story is going to be horrified. You know what I mean? They're going to be like, what the hell is going on? But again, like, that's the thing. It ignores the fact that less established actors will feel obliged or in debt, And even if we look at Blake Lively specifically, right? Like, it also depends on what your reputation is as a person. Like, I feel like there are certain female actors and female celebrities in general who can get away with it because they've cultivated a personality of rebellion. And I often think that this works in your favor, even though absolutely nothing usually does when it comes to being a female celebrity. Like, you can be damaged for anything. Like, you can have your reputation taken from you in any way. But I think that if you build your brand on being disagreeable in general, when you are disagreeable and it's fed as a media story, people lose, like, the steam of that is lost very quickly. For example, Rihanna, right? Like, Rihanna, ever since she went on that good girl gone bad thing, like, when she's disagreeable and kind of a dick to the press, people see it as amusing as opposed to, oh my God, she's such an asshole. In a way that if somebody has like a very squeaky clean image, the way that Blake Lively, I would say in relation was a much more established and general kind of Hollywood starlet, very A-list. Husband is like the funny guy. Their branding is very like all American family, and like for her, like, again, you never really hear anything about Blake Lively coming out of sets before. Like, I don't know what her reputation was on Gossip Girl or anything, but like nobody has ever really had a problem with her. So she's never been the problem in any of her TV shows or films. But the media is always looking for a person who has a generally good reputation to drag them down to the depths of hell. Like, because it's boring for them to keep someone on a pedestal for too long. So like they did this with Anne Hathaway. They did this with, like, you can find many people who have like relatively agreeable personalities and like relatively positive what do you call it, impressions in the media, who the media was very eager to be like, but deep down, she's actually a raging demon and she's horrible. And here's all the evidence. And they got so much media attention from all the drama with Justin Baldoni. It was endless media fodder. And like TMZ and these kinds of outlets, they're looking for what can retain the public imagination for long enough. And we can continue to destroy this person's reputation, but sell so much as a result of doing that. Like perpetually, like looking for how many months they went on about that case. And they did it with Olivia Wilde too, right, when she left her husband. Did anybody think about Olivia Wilde at all before that? No. And then suddenly she left Jason Sudeikis. It's like, oh, this evil grown woman has left this man for a pop star like Harry Styles. And now we're going to spend the next 6 cycles talking about how she's doing this because it sells. And especially if you have an image of being agreeable, squeaky clean, good person, like generally nobody has any beef with you. If you're a woman, they do everything to try to tarnish that as much as possible because it sells in the media, and you can also prolong that drama for really long. If you have a reputation for being kind of a stick in the mud, angry, and like a disagreeable person, they maybe have 2 cycles out of you. Oh, she was so disagreeable on that set. She's such a diva. Okay. Like now, if somebody calls JLo a diva, it's like, okay, what's new? We knew that. You know what I mean? Like it's established as her brand. So part of your branding is also like, I always like, I mean, I tell women this in real life. It's not even about being a celebrity. People are going to hate you anyway. Be disagreeable. Be inconvenient and difficult to control. People are going to make a mountain out of something you do anyway. Be a bitch. Okay. They get the work done. Be horrible because nobody gives you anything for being a good person, like being a good girl, not even a good person. You know, having the good girl reputation will do nothing for you. Be disagreeable, be monstrous, at least earn their ire, right? At least earn their hatred. Like if people are going to hate me anyway, I'm going to do everything I can to earn that.
Absolutely.
So you're already on the soapbox. If you're comfortable, you can stay on the soapbox and tell us your take. We've only hinted at it so far, which is about child actors and their vulnerability and situation, all of this, and what desperately needs to change there.
So child acting in the States is one of the most exploitative, and yet it's painted as like such a, we discovered this treasure gem of a child and like look at all the fame and it's a rags to riches kind of story. Like that's usually the messaging of child actors in general, but I've never not seen it be completely exploitative, no matter which country I've looked at it, you know, because the truth is you're taking childhood away from that person. And you're taking their ability to experience a normal life away. And very often those children become the breadwinners for their family. And that introduces this like psychological dynamic that's very like Hilary Duff actually spoke about how she's estranged from her sister. Hilary Duff was a huge star in the 2000s. Like she had done Lizzie McGuire and all these other shows, just for people who don't know. And she talked about how she and her sister are presently at odds with each other, and how it was a very difficult environment at home because she became the breadwinner, and traditionally like fathers feel that responsibility. And so it caused a lot of drama between her and her dad, but also caused a lot of drama between her and her sister because she got all this fame and the sister was doing all the backing vocals for her and the sister had none of the fame. And it just bred this sense of competition where she couldn't have a normal life at home and she couldn't have a normal life outside of the home either. And this is like, you know, there's many situations in which the parents have been downright exploitative. There were stage moms, or there were fathers or mothers who wanted to be famous themselves and couldn't do it. And so like their children was like their last hope. And what ends up happening is just so much psychological and financial exploitation, and often sexual exploitation as well, because many of these parents pimp out their children to the producers and the studios, especially like back in the 90s with like Nickelodeon and Dan Schneider and all of these other people. There's a great book called I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy, where she talked about being a child actor. I recommend a lot of people to read that book because she talks a lot about like what it's like to grow up in that kind of religious fundamentalist family where the mother really wanted to be a star and couldn't. And so she put all of her hopes and dreams on her daughter and then spent the rest of her life controlling her effectively. And yeah, like I've known cases in India of like child influencers who like the parents are trying to pimp them out to producers, and so they inject them with growth hormones and stuff to try to get them to go into puberty earlier so that they can sell them as like sexual objects to producers. So it's like children are very, very they're just not looked at. And then in the US specifically, they have this thing called Coogan's Law, which is that 20 something 20% of your income that you earn is put into a fund that you don't have access to until you're 21. And usually that's not
Mhm.
enough, you know what I mean, like to put yourself through college or have a steady life. I honestly think that, I was talking to Ellie about this, and I was like, I honestly think that that money, that amount should probably be more to 60 to 70% more, because it de-incentivizes parents from using their children as like a economic prop or like a financial kind of ticket to material wealth. Like, I don't think any parent should look at their child as a potential breadwinner or like the person who's responsible for making the money in the family. And I feel like the only way to de-incentivize that is to actually increase the amount that they put into Coogan's Law, because you'll notice many of the actors, by the time they've hit 18, money was either terribly managed by somebody who stole their money, they were children and didn't know better, or their parents actually
Yeah.
spent all the money. So by the time they reached, like, they became of age to handle their own finances, the money was gone, you know. And so many of them, being the breadwinners of their family, their parents would spend all of this money, blow it all up. And that's why you've seen cases like Macaulay Culkin, and I think Ariel Winter from Modern Family. They actually sought emancipation from their parents because they were very exploited by them financially. And that doesn't even include like some of the sexual exploitation, which is also very rampant. And so, it's like, children are one of like the, like, just under thought of group of people. Like, they're so uniquely vulnerable. I mean, I don't think it's any better when it happens to women, but I think grown adults have a lot more agency over the way that they're
Mhm.
portrayed compared to a child. I was talking to Ellie about like a scene that, I mean, a show that I was working on that I had gotten fired from, because I had like vocalized some objections to the way that they were shooting this particular child. Like, it was a scene that was shot for laughs, which was like the child was asked to do something that was normally associated with like grown adults. And even though they were trying to, like, I'm trying not to give too many details, just not to identify myself,
Mhm.
but the scene involved the child like manhandling some items that only adults would use, and it was played off as laughs. And I was like, but the child can't consent to this, and one day they're going to be older and they're going to look back at the scene and it's not going to seem so funny, and there's no adult
Mhm.
that's really standing up for them. Their parent is not objecting to this. Like, if I was a parent, I would, but their parent is so locked in on the fact that they might make a lot of money out of this and become famous from
Mhm.
the show, that they just don't care that their child is being asked to do something that's actually kind of sexual in nature. And so I had a lot of objections to it, and I brought this up all through writing it, down to the point where I insisted and I asked for the character to, like, the show to age up the character from like 4 to 5. Can you imagine, they were trying to get a 4 to 5 year old
Oh my
do a
God.
sex act? To, I was like, at least 8 or 9, you know, which was a huge ask too. Like, they just were not. They were like, 8 or 9 is not any better, but 8 or 9 is at least like, you know, conscious in a way that a 4 to 5 year old is not. Like, how do you direct a 4 to 5 year old, you know, in a show?
Oh,
Because you can't, like, I mean, also people will tell you it's notoriously hard to work with child actors. Like, I love kids, but they're the worst to deal with SS stars. Temperamental, diva-ish, you name it, you know. And also, you only get them for a short amount of time. Especially in the US, they can only work like a certain number of hours legally. So I obviously had major objections to the scene, because I was like, this may be funny to us right now in the moment because we're grown adults looking at the scene and being like, haha, this is funny. But years from now, this person is going to grow up to be a grown adult, and they're going to look back at this and be like, why the hell did anybody allow me to shoot this scene? It's so inappropriate, you know?
well, and
And
I would wanna say not even just that, but, if that was happening not on a television set, if that was just happening in somebody's home and it was a joke, that's grooming, right? Like, putting
yep,
a child
yep,
in a sexual situation that they don't understand is sexual.
yep. Yep, and people were trying to play it off for a laugh, and I was like, I just don't see what's funny. And again, I'm a comedian, okay? Like, I did not see what was funny in that scene at all. I was like, this is not a person who's consenting to this in any meaning. Like, their parents' consent is meaningless to me right now, because the child's rights as a human being need to be protected more than what their parent, like. You know what? I'm at odds with parents sometimes, and that's okay. I'm okay with disagreeing with a parent if I feel like they're not doing what's best for children as a collective,
Yeah,
as opposed to their individual child. You know, because this is about children as a collective and not one individual child, you know?
yeah,
And I think we need to start seeing that as well, as like, what is the role of children in the entertainment business? Because in my opinion, they have no role. They have no business being in
yeah.
this industry. It's for grown adults,
Well,
you
and it's
know?
like you said, children aren't allowed to work. We have child labor laws for a reason, and somehow we
Yeah.
have this magical exception when it comes to entertainment. And
Yeah.
what you were saying about families depending on a child's income. that's not just inappropriate, it is definitionally child abuse. I mean, it is emotional and financial abuse of a child to
Mm-hmm.
parentify them in that way. And I also wanted to add, I have a very, very strong, I share your um, statement that there's no place for children in the entertainment industry, not just because of the blatant exploitation, secondary exploitation that they're made vulnerable to, but also from a child development perspective. I've raised kids since I was in my mid-teens, and so
Mm-hmm.
20 plus 27 years, and had done a lot of childcare, and especially studied a lot of the role of play and make believe in the
Mm-hmm.
psychological development of children. And
Mm-hmm.
play and make believe is fundamental. This is how children create their psyche and their understanding of the world. And so
Mm-hmm.
if that child is being directed by adults in how to play, those adults
Mm-hmm.
are disrupting that.
Yeah.
Children have to be, for the purposes, not even I have feelings about disrupting children's play in the context of education, religious upbringing, etc., but for sheerly for the purpose of adult pleasure and entertainment, you know
Yeah.
um there's
I mean,
there's
I'm
no
sure
way
there's like a lot
possible
of
way to do it
studies about
ethically.
their, yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of like studies about their psychological development being impeded, and it is make believe at the end of the day, like being an actor. But I think that actors, adult actors, are able to see, like they have the situational awareness to be able to determine what is real and what is fake in a way that a
Yes,
child is not. For a
exactly.
child, that is their only normal, you know what I mean?
That's
and
exactly what I'm
and it's
saying. Yeah.
not normal, it's not normal. The way that they grew up, the way that the child actors and the child stars and the child pop stars grow up is not normal, and they're exposed to a lot of incredibly predatory people in this industry who understand that the parents are easy to exploit, you know, because again, they're still coming after the same kinds of kids that they were coming after with MGM coming after the women back in the 40s and the 30s. They target people
Hmm.
who come from families where they're reliant on having a breadwinner, and they need someone to bring in the money, and the child is a valuable tool to get that money, you know. And if you look at like Christopher Columbus, this is the guy who directed all the Home Alone movies. He was actually front and center, like viewing all of the damage that happened to Macaulay Culkin as a result of those movies, and like the kind of the whole emancipation process and everything that Macaulay had to go through with his family. And it was because of all this damage that he saw with Macaulay that he was very intentional about how he casted for Harry Potter, and he made sure that all three of the kids came from families where like they were not needed to be financial breadwinners at all. I believe they all came from fairly upper middle class families. And so it was very intentional that he was like, I also made sure to personally be in on all of the casting to make sure that like the parents were not stage moms or stage dads. You know what I mean? Like I very much wanted to avoid what happened with Macaulay Culkin happening to those kids. And Harry Potter was like very regimented in terms of like the school time and stuff that they were expected to have. But that being said, like I don't know any like do I know any actors from Harry Potter who acted like in the smaller roles? I don't think so, but I don't know how effective the education process is if you study like that. Like Emma Watson, for example, is kind of, you know, very unique in that she was probably always quite academically strong. And so I think for her, it didn't really affect her educational development by going to school in that kind of way and then being able to get the best of the best kind of education by going to like Brown and Oxford or whatever. But I think for an ordinary kid, like you don't go to a regular school, like you're not learning regular math, you're not learning how to socialize with ordinary kids, you're not learning how to be like a regular person. It's like, because school is more than just studying, right? It's also like the way
Hmm.
that you get to socialize with your peers, and that's really important. And I believe the actor who played Draco Malfoy, Tom Felton, he did go to an ordinary school at one point. He's the only one I think who did go to an ordinary school. But apparently they made a lot of fun of him. Like they were like, "Oh my God, you're Malfoy!" Like he's like, and they kept saying my father would hear about this and stuff. And I was like, "Yeah, so now you can't have an ordinary childhood either because now the other kids are bullying you because they're like, oh, who the hell does he think he is, Draco Malfoy?" And yeah, he is. You know what I mean? Like he literally is. So he can't have a normal life. So I don't know how like like I think in any situation it's detrimental. I don't know how much you can mitigate, you know, like I don't know how much you can actually prevent the psychological harm or the childhood development from being stunted. Many of them
Again,
complain about that.
again, we're talking about mitigating harm when there is no purpose for doing it except for adult pleasure
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
profit. So it feels like rearranging chairs on the Titanic. I mean, it's just talking about how to make it safer. Like if we transferred this logic to how do we make children who are, being abused at home safer,
Yeah.
while
Yeah. I
keeping them in
agree
that
with you.
environment. It doesn't make any sense.
I mean, personally, I feel like the best way to like do this in general is to just make it animated. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Animating,
Yeah.
like animating shows just allows you to do that. Like most of the stars you see for shows where children are like the main characters, like Rugrats and stuff, I'm pretty sure the voice actors for that were adult people.
Mhm.
So you get
Mhm.
bypass a lot of that by, and also it's like a show about magic at the end of the day. You know what I mean? Like there's beautiful animation to be done. Like I grew up on the works of Miyazaki, and I'm like, yeah, animation could have killed it for Harry Potter specifically. I don't know why we needed to have like a full-fledged TV show, because now that's a longer acted commitment from those actors, and they're spending seasons and seasons. Like they've done this with Avatar: The Last Airbender too, and I'm like, who wanted this as a live action show to begin with? Nobody. And now you've made these kids like, you know, the sad benefactors of everyone's rage because it won't match the original, because it never will, you know. And so yeah, like I'm totally against having child actors on set. And I've been in situations where I've had to work with some child actors, and I've like investigated and spoken to them a little bit about like what, you know, whether they like it and are they happy with all the other people that they work with and stuff. And it's very bizarre to ask a child like, what do you know, do you like the people you work with, because they shouldn't be working. Like Miley Cyrus, you know, she talked about this too, and she was like, when kids were having sleepovers and going to school, I was working. I had a tour schedule. I had to be up at a call time at like 5 a.m. and then get into hair and makeup, and then I had to go and shoot. Like she's like, I had a job when people had, like, I had a full-fledged like 9 to 5-ish kind of job when most of the kids my age were going to school and hanging out with their peers. So of course I'm not normal, because fame is traumatizing. And I think that's the other thing, is like fame is very traumatizing for even adults. Like it's not a, you know, like fame is just
Yeah.
a very, very traumatizing experience. I think when you're an adult, if you're over 30, you're more equipped to handle it in a way that you're not when you're really young. And I think it was Taylor Swift or someone who pointed out and said some of the people are frozen at the age at which they became famous. And that's why they tend to have more arrested development. Like they tend to behave the way they, because that's the last time they remember things being normal. And then after that, their life was never normal again. So it's like they always regress back to the time that they went back to when they felt like they would have been happier. You know what I mean? When they had the nostalgia of like regular life. And their life is not regular after that point. And I think if you do it to a child, the child has no sense of what normalcy looks like at all. And so yeah, it's not just the fact that they have to be a working person. It's also just fame by its very nature is very traumatizing, especially if you're a girl. I like the way that they treated Emma Watson when she was in those movies, like countdown clocks to her turning 18 when she would lose her virginity, and like taking pictures of her, like, you know, up her trousers and up her skirt or whatever, like having to experience that as a young little girl and then growing into adulthood with those kinds of experiences. Like you have a very different relationship to fame than you would if you were a male actor, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with a lot of the points you made. I don't think children should be there.
Yeah, I've called, and I agree with you also about the effects on adults, about fame being inherently toxic. I've called celebrity culture for several years now. I think it's just a public, human sacrifice, public torture for the purpose of, watching somebody's life disintegrate.
Mm-hmm.
It's really sickening.
And that's the thing. I think people are very eager to um people are like people are very fascinated by fame, but I think at the same time they're it's become, you have to look at it through the lens of capitalism as well, because that's really where it's all stemming down from. Like even if you look at like the structure of how um uh prostitution works, or even like the film industry hierarchies work, right? It's the point is we have to create an underclass to justify nobody criticizing the upper elites that benefit from the structure the most. And that's with almost every structure you look like. Obviously, I think every single person in this room is very, very much against developing an underclass that's sole purpose is there to absorb the bullshit from everyone else. And if you look at the film industry, this underclass is most definitely children.
Yeah.
Because they're easy targets, because nobody really fights for them, and because even their parents are in on it. You know?
Yeah.
And so it's like, until you, like, the realistic way to at least de-incentivize parents from being able to exploit their children from a preliminary standpoint is to take the money out of it to begin with. If they can't profit off of their children solely through their appearances and things like that, or all the money that they earn goes into a fund that the child can't access until they're an actual adult, then the parents can't rely on the child being the breadwinner, because they're not going to have access to that money until they're of adult age anyway. And so at that point, it's the child's decision as an adult whether they want to spend that money on their parent or not. You know what I mean? As opposed to, I have these bills to pay and my child is going to pay all my bills for me. And so my child has to go into every other acting job and audition for everything because I need them to make money, which is what, like, this is the case with Keke Palmer. This is the case with Miley Cyrus. This is the case with so many. I mean, Miley Cyrus, at least her father was already famous, but almost all the other child actors you see, you look at what they grew up like, all of them were really poor, Justin Bieber included. You know, and they're exposed to people like Diddy and all these other people who, like, I'm very convinced that something happened to Justin Bieber. You know, I'm very
Yeah.
sure that something happened. And so it's like, I look at these kids and I look at the kids now, and I never write child characters in my stories unless it's like a 5-second thing, and even then it's, you know, like an off-camera situation where somebody can just scream as a child and be like, go. Like, I have a scene where, like, one of my characters, you know, she's coming to grips with her age because she's just turned 30. And in India, for example, you don't really start feeling old until, like, you know, when you're a little kid, when you're younger, people call you Didi, like elder sister. But you know you're turning old when they start to straight up call you auntie. So I had a scene where she's walking down the street and someone is like, auntie, can you help me get that ball? And she turns around and she's like, I'm an auntie's age now, but there's no actual child. You know what I mean? It's just like there's an off-camera scene, because I've become that sensitive to, like, if there doesn't need to be a child here, there will not be one. You know, and even then, it's just, I just don't, I prefer not working with them. Like, I prefer not having them on my set if I can help it.
We've been going for nearly 2 hours. I'd love to ask you 10 more questions, but we're just gonna have to do some kind of part 2 or invite you back on a differently themed stream. Just to close it out for today, to not occupy your time for too long. So you mentioned some things already that you do in your own practice, right? Like, absolutely minimize the presence of children is sort of a green flag in a writer or a producer or a director or a production company. What else can people in the business look out for? What are some other green flags so that this business can, you know, for adults, like, first of all, okay, don't put your kid in the business. I think we've heard that loud and clear. Don't put your kid in there. But if you're an adult in the industry or thinking about getting into the industry, what are green flags to look out for in other professionals?
How agreeable they are to feedback from people who are not the same tier of authority as them. Like, do they only listen to other producers or people who are, like, in the studio, or do they listen to their team as a whole? Right, when you bring up conflict with them, because, like I said, because it's a hierarchy, you want to have a person who's got, like, a communal mindset as opposed to an individualistic one. You know, who's like, I need my vision, it's me, myself, and I, my genius. You know, like, those kinds of people are best avoided, because they don't really care who they hurt in the process of, you know, achieving greatness. I think the other thing to watch out for, with female directors specifically, is to, like, study their body of work and see how they've depicted sex scenes and stuff in general in their work, or whether they've had them at all. Because that's usually their style is what you can depend on. You know what I mean? If they're a person who, and this isn't just relevant to women, this is relevant to any director, but past precedence does apply here, in the sense of, like, look at their body of work and see how they tend to view depictions of certain kinds of intimacy specifically, because that tends to be their style across their work. So even if they were given big studio money, that's the way that they shoot. So, you know, if somebody is shooting things in a, like, I would, if I had watched, for example, Sam Levinson's work before, like, I would know not to work with him. You know what I mean? Because, like, that's good. Like, that's a good way of gauging what the work is going to be like moving forward. So I feel like that's one of the things to watch out for, is, like, do your due diligence before you sign contracts with anyone, to make sure that you understand what their general vision is like and the style in which they shoot. because that's the expectation that you're going to be expected to deliver regardless of what aspect of the shoot that you're going to be a part of, whether you're editing, whether you're an intern, whether you're an actor, it doesn't matter. Like, you're executing that person's vision based off of somebody else's blueprint. And like, I can write a scene that's not meant to be explicit, but a very explicit director is going to make it explicit, or they're going to completely change this. Like, screenwriters don't have that much power, you guys. Like, the most that they write like is almost always changed. I don't think I've had a single script that was shot exactly the way it was written. That almost never happens. In fact, I will go as far as saying it's never happened to me. I've never had a situation where my script has been shot exactly as intended, exactly as written. There's usually changes that come in straight from the studio and producers being like, we have this advertiser. Amazon wants you to use their newest Google Home. So you need to have a line that says, I can barely hear you over the Amazon Google speaker or whatever, some cheesy shit. You know what I mean? Some product integration bullshit that you didn't want to do. So you have to make sure that, like, don't assume that it's the writer that insisted for a scene to be shot that way. Usually the power is concentrated in the production suite and like the directors. So just make sure that you know who you're working with. Like, it's not a green flag. This is general advice I'm giving to people who choose to work in the industry. Like, do your due diligence on people before you actually work with them. If they've had work out, that's a good way of gauging what to expect. And also, people in crews talk. They talk with each other. You hear a lot about what other people are like based on their behaviors with their past crew. So a good way to find out is like, like, for example, if you were going to apply to a job on LinkedIn, you would obviously reach out to some employees and be like, what's your experience like? Can we do an informational, coffee date or something? You can absolutely do that with crew as well, where like, if you're going to work for a director or some director is trying to hire you, you can find out people they've worked with in previous sets and Google them, reach out, Instagram, DM them or whatever, and find out like what they're like. This is just from a protection. Like, I'm looking at it from really a protection standpoint, because green flags are very easy to fake. Like, it's very easy for someone to convince you that they're deeply progressive and interesting people, and then you get on set with them and you're like, oh my god, this person's a tyrant. And so it's really important to do like due diligence is the first thing I would say to anyone, is like, make sure you do your homework when it comes to who you choose to work with, because you're the one who's going to be stuck with them, working with them for like a week or a few months. So make sure you like investigate them with seriousness. In terms of green flags, like, I do think having intimacy coordinators in general is a good faith act. How efficient and effective that intimacy coordinator is dependent on like the kinds of films they've done. Like, again, if the intimacy coordinator has a history of work, you can look at their history of work and see how those scenes were shot, and then you can determine whether you feel like that person has done it in a tasteful, respectful way or not. And then that obviously the intimacy coordinator had a hand in it, and then accordingly work with them. But yeah, everything, like, the thing is, if somebody has a reputation that precedes them, you will usually find out. And if a person has a body of work, you can usually do enough investigation to come to your own conclusions. The real hard part is when the person is new and you have no frame of reference for them. That's when you're always taking a bit of a gamble, because they don't have a reputation. And those are the ones I'd always say, like, enter them with some caution. I usually have exit clauses in all of my contracts. That's something I encourage a lot of people to do. Make friends with lawyers. Get some lawyer friends. I really recommend like finding someone who can help look through your legal work, because you want to have a kill clause with anything you do, to execute to leave if shit gets bad. That's like just basic standard practice I would give for any job, let alone working in the film business, is make sure you have the ability to exit if things get bad, because you just don't know. That's the thing. It's like, speaking as like, if I had to speak to my own experience, there's been situations where I'm not a person who really believes like the worst in people when I first meet them. I'm a person who genuinely wants to believe that people are coming to a project with the same level of passion and goodwill that I am. And there have been many times where that's backfired on me heavily because I've been too trusting. You know what I mean? And I've worked with some people who superficially seemed like they were great people. Like, I liked their politics, I liked the way that they operated, I liked the work that they did. And then I met them in person and they were not good people to work with. And then I was stuck in a position where I had to work with them for months after, because I was contracted them and I had no exit clause in any of my contracts. So I was stuck working on that project, dealing with this person who is benefiting from a veneer of progressivism that they have absolutely not earned. So always put an exit clause in, like, befriend some lawyer who works in the entertainment business who can help do pro bono work for you if you can't afford it. Or if you can't afford it, genuinely pay a lawyer. But I will say, like, I've gotten more use out of my lawyers than I have my managers, and that's actually saying something. Because I love exiting a bad situation, and I think everybody should be able to do that.
I think that's excellent advice. Sybil, do you have a last question before we close out for the day?
No, like you said, I think there are a lot of different avenues that we would like to keep going down, but it would open a whole new can of worms. But I do hope Diana will join us again, and I know you have been excited, Elly, about your movie series that you're going to be doing. So I'm hoping that she'll be back to cover what we weren't able to cover today.
Yeah, I would love to. I mean, that's the thing. When you work right now, we're actually going through such a major world change when it comes to just labor reform as a whole. And this isn't just specific to the entertainment business, but this is just like how labor is being viewed in general with AI and everything. Like, your humanity is important. Like, don't let people steal that from you. Don't let people dehumanize you and degrade you, and look out for yourself. And you know what? Because everything is online now, you can find out almost everything about someone if you do enough digging. So cyberstalk people, dig, do the digging. Make sure you find out who you're getting into literal bed with, because you don't want to be in a situation where you're dealing with people who don't care about treating you with any respect or integrity. And look out for each other. I think that's the main thing is, speak up for each other, look out for each other, and be okay with being the villain. I think there's been many situations in which, like, by sticking my neck out for someone else, I've been the one that's dehumanized or demonized. And I'd still do it. I would still lose I would lose my reputation a billion times if it meant that somebody else didn't have to go through that, especially kids. So I think the work that you guys are doing is just amazing. And I mean, I would love to be on board for any other film discussions you have. I hope that some of what I said was insightful. It's I like it's like I think we were talking about this, but the line between just prostitution and like the porn industry and film is very thin, and always has been, always has been. And now, like, I think that the only way that we're going to get any real protections is if more of us come together to vocalize, just our disdain and displeasure for the way that things are operating, and actually focus on just trying to get legal reform made as well to prevent people from being used in this manner, especially children. But for what it's worth, I do think there are some aspects that are getting better, at least better than they were in the 40s or the 50s.
Thank you so much for giving us so much of your time. And in case you're worried that people are not interested, we're literally having record-breaking viewing numbers right now. There's over 100 people listening right now, which is a lot for our little channel. Yes. So people are clearly interested. We also did get comments, but most people were kind of just kept expressing shock at what you were saying rather than asking questions. That's why I didn't bring them up. But there's been an active audience, which is very exciting. Gratitude as always to the listeners who stayed with us for over 2 hours. And again, I'll advertise next week's stream. We'll have a guest on who's done an absolute deep dive and been following the Baldoni versus Lively case. So everything we've talked about today, we'll essentially do a case study on one specific case of abuse and again, of a superstar, right? Like, if this is, someone was saying in the chat, like, if Meryl Streep can be abused on set, what hope do up-and-coming actresses have? Yeah, what if Blake Lively in 2026, or I don't know, I guess they were shooting in 2024 or whenever it was, can be abused on set? What hope do other actresses have? Well, there's a little bit of hope in here, but this is a fight that we'll need to keep fighting, and I'm glad that we have warriors on our side like Diana, who's in the industry trying to change things from the inside. So thank you so much. We hope to have you back soon.
Thank you. I'm doing my best. Please continue to have faith in me. I'm trying. It's a tough beast, but I think the only way that we can change things is if more women are here. And, the more women need to keep talking and keep speaking up and keep being inconvenient. Like I said, like, make it, if they're going to hate you anyway, make it worth their while.
Hell yeah. I think that's a great one to leave on.
Absolutely. So Bye, everyone, and hope to see you next week.